The Arizona sun bore down mercilessly on the parched earth, turning the red dust into a shimmering haze that danced above the desert floor. It was the summer of 1870, and the territory was as unforgiving as the men who tried to tame it. The wind carried grit that stung exposed skin and found its way into every crevice, a constant reminder of nature's dominion over this harsh land. Mary Elizabeth Whitman pressed her face against the cool glass of her bedroom window, watching the heat waves distort the distant mesas. At 19, she possessed the delicate beauty common to young women raised in relative comfort, fair skin that burned easily under the desert sun, corn silk hair that she kept pinned in a proper bun, and eyes the color of prairie grass after rain. But beneath that fragile exterior beat a heart growing desperate with each passing day. "Mary Elizabeth," her father's voice boomed from downstairs, causing her to flinch. "Mr. Harrington will be arriving for supper. I expect you presentable and agreeable." Josiah Whitman had built his ranch through sheer determination and ruthless business acumen. He'd come west after the war, like so many others seeking fortune and a new beginning. Now he owned 3,000 acres of grazing land and a copper claim that promised to make him even wealthier. But wealth meant nothing without legacy, and Mary was his only child, a daughter when he'd prayed for sons. Mary's hands trembled as she smoothed her calico dress. Samuel Harrington was 43 years old, with hands that had grown cruel from years of driving men in his silver mines. She'd seen how he treated his workers, had heard whispers of his temper from the Mexican women who did laundry in town. The thought of those hands touching her made her stomach turn. "I cannot," she whispered to her reflection. "I will not." The decision came suddenly, like lightning splitting a summer sky. Mary had always been obedient, had always bent to her father's will like grass before the wind. But this was different. This was her life, her future, her very soul at stake. Moving with purpose now. She changed into her riding clothes, a split skirt her father disapproved of but tolerated for practical reasons. She packed what little she could carry. A change of clothes, her mother's silver locket, a canteen, some biscuits from the kitchen, and the small pistol her father had taught her to use for protection against rattlesnakes and coyotes. The house was quiet as she slipped down the back stairs. The servants were preparing for the evening meal, and her father was likely in his study, reviewing the marriage contract he'd drawn up with Harrington. The thought spurred her forward. In the stable, she saddled Buttercup, her gentle mare. The horse nickered softly. Sensing her mistress's agitation, "Shh, girl," Mary murmured, her voice catching. "We're going on an adventure. You and I." She led the mare out through the back gate, walking until they were out of sight of the house before mounting. Then she urged Buttercup into a gallop, heading west toward the setting sun and the unknown wilderness beyond. The exhilaration of escape lasted exactly 3 hours. By then, the sun had set, leaving her in the blue-black darkness of the desert night. The temperature had plummeted, and Mary pulled her thin jacket closer, suddenly aware of how unprepared she was for this journey. She'd acted on emotion, not reason, a fatal flaw in this unforgiving land. Buttercup picked her way carefully among the rocks and cacti, but even the sure-footed mare couldn't navigate perfectly in the darkness. When a coyote howled nearby, the horse shied violently. Mary, exhausted and distracted, lost her balance. The world tilted, and she felt herself falling. Falling! The impact drove the breath from her lungs. Pain shot through her right ankle and up her leg. Buttercup, freed of her rider's weight, bolted into the darkness, the sound of hoofbeats fading until only silence remained. Mary lay still for a moment, fighting tears. Crying would solve nothing. She tested her ankle. Not broken, thank God, but badly twisted. Using a nearby boulder, she pulled herself upright and looked around. Nothing but shadows and the distant shapes of saguaro cacti standing like sentinels against the star-filled sky. "Think," she told herself. Father always said to think, not panic. But thinking only made her situation clearer. She was alone, injured, with limited water and no horse. She didn't even know exactly where she was, somewhere west of the ranch. But the darkness had erased all landmarks. The coyotes howled again, closer now, and Mary gripped her pistol with shaking hands. Morning would come. She just had to survive until morning. She found a cluster of rocks that provided some shelter and settled in for the night, her ankle throbbing with each heartbeat. The desert sounds seemed amplified. The rustle of small creatures, the distant call of an owl, the whisper of wind through thorny ocotillo. Dawn came slowly, painting the eastern sky in shades of rose and gold. Mary had dozed fitfully, starting awake at every sound. Her water was nearly gone, her lips already cracking in the dry air. But worse was coming. She could see it building on the horizon like a wall of brown fury. The sandstorm hit with the force of a freight train. One moment the air was clear. The next, she was engulfed in a roiling cloud of dust and debris. The wind screamed like a living thing, driving sand into her eyes, nose, and mouth. Mary pulled her jacket over her head and curled into a ball. But there was no escape from the storm's fury. Hours passed, or perhaps minutes. Time lost meaning in the brown darkness. Her injured ankle sent shoots of agony up her leg with each movement. Her water was gone now, her throat raw from dust and thirst. The rational part of her mind knew she was dying, but she was too exhausted to feel fear anymore. When unconsciousness finally claimed her, it was almost a relief. Taza had been tracking the storm since dawn. 28 years of living in this land had taught him to read the signs, the way the birds fell silent, the peculiar heaviness in the air, the wall of dust building on the horizon. He'd taken shelter in a shallow cave, waiting for the worst to pass. He was returning to his band's camp when he saw the splash of blue fabric among the red rocks. His first instinct was caution. The white eyes brought nothing but death to his people. Their soldiers had massacred entire villages. Their diseases had claimed more Apache lives than all their bullets combined. The smart thing would be to ride on, to pretend he'd seen nothing. But something made him dismount and approach. Perhaps it was the smallness of the figure, or the way the wind had partially covered it with dust, making it seem already half buried. Or perhaps it was simply that Taza had seen too much death to add more to his conscience by inaction. The woman, hardly more than a girl, really, was unconscious but breathing. Her face was burned by sun and scoured by sand. Her ankle was swollen inside her boot, and her lips were cracked and bleeding. She clutched a small pistol in one hand, though it would do her no good now. Taza knelt beside her, his own memories stirring unbidden. Another woman, dark-haired and laughing, teaching him to track rabbits through the brush. His sister, gone now 3 winters, killed by soldiers who claimed they'd mistaken the gathering of women and children for a war party. He could leave this white woman here. No one would blame him. She would die, and the desert would claim her bones, and it would be as if she never existed. Justice, some might call it, for all the Apache bones that littered this land. But Taza was tired of death, tired of the endless cycle of killing and being killed. And this girl, whoever she was, had committed no crime except being born with pale skin in a land that had no mercy for anyone, regardless of color. He lifted her easily. She weighed no more than a young deer. Her head lolled against his shoulder, and she murmured something in her fever dreams, English words he didn't understand, though the tone spoke of fear and sorrow. His horse, trained to stand steady, accepted the double burden without complaint. Taza secured the unconscious woman in front of him and turned toward his temporary camp in the hidden canyon. He would give her water and shelter. What happened after that would be in the hands of the spirits. As they rode, the storm finally began to die, leaving the world scoured clean and strange. The setting sun painted the rocks in shades of blood and fire, and somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried its lonely call to the approaching night. The hidden canyon where Taza made his temporary camp was a world apart from the harsh desert above. Ancient cottonwoods clustered around a small spring, their leaves whispering secrets in the evening breeze. The rock walls rose steep and protective, holding the day's warmth even as the temperature plummeted with nightfall. Taza laid the unconscious woman on a bed of pine needles covered with his spare blanket. In the flickering light of his small fire, he could see her injuries more clearly. The ankle was badly swollen, possibly sprained. Her face and arms showed signs of severe sun exposure, and her breathing was shallow, labored from dehydration and exhaustion. He worked methodically, drawing on knowledge passed down through generations. First, water, but only small amounts at first. He soaked a strip of cloth and squeezed drops between her cracked lips. Too much too fast could do more harm than good. For her ankle, he gathered creosote leaves, crushing them to release their medicinal properties. The sharp, resinous smell filled the shelter as he made a poultice. His grandmother had taught him this when he was barely tall enough to reach her knee. "The desert provides everything," she used to say, "for those who know how to look." The night grew cold, as desert nights do. The temperature could drop 40 degrees from day to night, and this white woman's thin clothing offered little protection. Taza added more wood to the fire and moved her closer to its warmth, careful not to jostle her injured ankle. He found himself studying her face in the firelight. She was young, perhaps 19 or 20 winters. Her hair, where it wasn't matted with dust and sweat, was the color of dried grass. Her hands were soft, uncalloused, the hands of someone who had never known true hardship until now. What had driven her into the desert alone? As the night deepened, Taza prepared a tea from willow bark for the pain she would feel when she woke. He checked her ankle again, satisfied to see the swelling had not worsened. The poultice was doing its work. Near midnight, she began to stir. First just small movements, fingers twitching, eyelids fluttering. Then her breathing changed, becoming more rapid. Taza moved back, giving her space. He knew the fear that would come with waking. Mary's eyes opened slowly. Unfocused at first, the world swam in orange firelight and shadows. Pain pulsed through her ankle, and her throat felt like she'd swallowed sand. Memory returned in fragments. The storm, the fall, the endless brown darkness. Then she saw him. The scream died in her throat. Trapped by exhaustion and terror, an Apache warrior sat across the fire from her, his face painted in shadows and light. Everything her father had told her, every horror story whispered among the ranch wives, crashed through her mind at once. She tried to scramble backward but cried out as agony shot through her ankle. Her hand fumbled for her pistol, finding only empty air where it should have been. "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Please, no." Taza remained perfectly still, understanding her fear even if he didn't understand her words. He'd seen that same look in captured Apache women, in children fleeing soldiers. Fear was a universal language. Slowly, deliberately, he reached for the water gourd and held it out to her, making no move to approach. He set it on the ground between them and retreated. Mary's thirst warred with her terror. Her body screamed for water while her mind conjured images of torture and death. But the Apache, he wasn't attacking. He was sitting calmly, watching her with dark eyes that seemed more curious than cruel. Desperation won. She inched forward, never taking her eyes off him, and grabbed the gourd. The water was cool, slightly mineral-tasting, the most wonderful thing she'd ever experienced. She wanted to drain it all, but forced herself to sip slowly. Some distant memory of her father's survival lessons surfacing. When she lowered the gourd, the Apache pointed to her ankle and then to the poultice. He made a gesture she didn't understand, then pointed to himself and made a rapping motion. "You," Mary's voice cracked. "You helped me." He didn't respond. Of course he didn't understand English any more than she understood Apache. But he reached for something beside him and held it up. Her pistol, unloaded now, the bullets lined up neatly on a flat stone. The message was clear. "I could have harmed you. I chose not to." Mary felt tears sting her eyes. She was completely at his mercy, injured and alone. Yet he had tended her wounds and given her water. Everything she'd been taught about the Apache seemed to waver like heat mirages. Taza moved slowly to the fire and lifted a small pot. The smell of herbal tea wafted toward her. He poured some into a wooden cup and set it within her reach, then returned to his place. The tea was bitter but warming. As Mary drank, she studied her rescuer more closely. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps in his late 20s. His hair was long and black, held back by a cloth headband. Scars marked his arms and chest, evidence of a hard life in an unforgiving land. "Thank you," she said finally, though she knew he wouldn't understand. "Thank you for saving me." He tilted his head slightly, and she thought she saw the ghost of acknowledgement in his eyes. The night passed slowly. Mary dozed fitfully, starting awake each time to find the Apache still there, tending the fire or checking her ankle. Once, when she woke shivering despite the flames, she found an additional blanket draped over her. His own, she realized, noting that he now sat closer to the cold. In her father's stories, the Apache were devils incarnate, delighting in torture and death. But this man had shown her more kindness than she'd expected to find in the wilderness. The contradiction made her head spin, or perhaps that was the fever she could feel building in her body. Dawn came like a blessing, painting the canyon walls in soft pastels. Mary woke to find the Apache, she wished she knew his name, preparing something over the fire. The smell made her stomach clench with hunger despite her fear. He offered her a portion on a wooden plate. Some kind of meat, rabbit, she thought, mixed with plants she didn't recognize. Hunger overcame hesitation, and she ate gratefully. The food was simple but satisfying, flavored with herbs that were strange but not unpleasant. After eating, he approached her ankle again. This time, Mary didn't flinch away. He unwrapped the poultice, his hands surprisingly gentle, and examined the swelling. The herbs had drawn out some of the inflammation, but the joint was still painful and discolored. As he prepared a fresh poultice, Mary found herself watching his face. Concentration creased his brow, and she noticed a thin scar running from his left eyebrow to his cheek. What battle had caused that? What stories did his scars tell? "I don't even know your name," she said softly. He glanced up at her voice, and she pointed to herself. "Mary," she said clearly. "Mary." Understanding dawned in his eyes. He pointed to himself. "Taza. Taza," she repeated, and he nodded slightly. It was a small thing, exchanging names, but it shifted something between them. No longer was he just the Apache and she, the white woman. They were Taza and Mary, two people brought together by chance in a harsh land. As the morning progressed, Mary tried to convey her situation through gestures. She pointed east, toward where she thought her father's ranch might be, and shook her head violently. Then she mimicked riding a horse and falling. Taza seemed to understand at least part of it. He nodded and made his own gestures, indicating he had found her after the storm. But what now? Mary knew she couldn't walk on her ankle, and even if she could, she had no idea where she was. She was completely dependent on this man who, by all rights, should hate her and her kind. Her father had boasted of hiring men to clear out the Apache vermin from the edges of his land. How many of Taza's people had died at the hands of men like her father? The weight of this knowledge settled on her like a stone. She was not just any white woman. She was the daughter of Josiah Whitman, a man whose name was likely known and hated among the Apache, if Taza knew who her father was. "I'm sorry," she whispered, tears sliding down her cheeks. "I'm so sorry." Taza watched her cry with an unreadable expression. Perhaps he understood more than she thought, or perhaps he simply recognized grief when he saw it. After a moment, he rose and walked to the other side of the fire, giving her privacy for her tears. As the sun climbed higher, the canyon grew warm. Taza packed his few belongings with practiced efficiency, and Mary realized with a jolt that they would be leaving. But to go where? Back to his people? The thought terrified her. But what choice did she have? He fashioned a crutch from a sturdy branch, wrapping the top with cloth to cushion it. When he offered it to her, Mary tried to stand, gasping as pain shot through her ankle despite the support. Taza frowned and said something in Apache, his tone clearly indicating she should sit back down. He seemed to be debating something, his dark eyes moving from her to his horse and back again. Finally, He sighed and began constructing a travois, a simple drag sled she'd seen Plains Indians use. It would slow them down considerably, she realized, making them vulnerable to anyone who might be following. Yet he was doing it anyway. As Mary watched him work, she felt the first stirring of something beyond fear and gratitude. This man, who had every reason to leave her to die, was instead risking his own safety to help her. In all her 19 years, surrounded by civilized men who spoke of honor while building their fortunes on the backs of others, she had never witnessed such simple, unadorned decency. "Taza," she said, and he looked up from his work. She pressed her hand to her heart, hoping he would understand. "Thank you, truly." Something shifted in his expression, a softening, perhaps, or maybe just recognition of her sincerity. He nodded once and returned to his task, but Mary thought his movements were gentler now, less wary. As the sun reached its zenith, they prepared to leave the shelter of the canyon. Mary settled onto the travois, her ankle elevated and cushioned as best as possible. She had no idea where they were going or what awaited her. But as Taza clicked to his horse and they began to move, she realized that for the first time since fleeing her father's house, she wasn't afraid. The desert stretched out before them, harsh and beautiful under the brilliant sky, and somewhere beyond the horizon, their fates awaited. The Apache camp appeared suddenly, as if materialized from the desert itself. One moment Mary saw only rocks and scattered juniper. The next, she could make out wickiups, dome-shaped dwellings of bent branches and brush, nestled in a protected valley. Smoke from cooking fires rose in thin columns, and she could see figures moving among the structures. Her heart began to race. Throughout the 2-day journey, she'd managed to push aside thoughts of what would happen when they reached Taza's people. Now, faced with the reality, every terrifying story she'd ever heard came flooding back. Taza must have sensed her fear, for he stopped his horse and spoke quietly in Apache, his tone reassuring though she understood none of the words. He dismounted and walked beside the travois as they entered the camp, perhaps trying to show that she was under his protection. The reaction was immediate. Women and children who had been going about their daily tasks froze, staring at the white woman being brought into their midst. Men emerged from wickiups, their expressions ranging from surprise to suspicion to outright hostility. A few reached for weapons before sharp words from Taza stayed their hands. An older man approached, his bearing marking him as someone of authority. His face was weathered like ancient leather, marked by decades of sun and hardship. This had to be Nantan, the chief Taza had mentioned through gestures during their journey. The conversation between Taza and Nantan was lengthy and appeared heated. Mary caught her name several times, and white eyes, a term she'd learned from the Mexican workers on her father's ranch. Nantan's gestures were emphatic, often pointing back the way they'd come. Other men joined the discussion, voices rising and falling like wind through the canyon. A woman approached the travois, elderly but moving with purpose. She studied Mary with sharp black eyes, then spoke rapidly to Taza. He responded, gesturing to Mary's ankle. The woman made a dismissive sound but knelt beside the travois anyway, unwrapping the poultice to examine the injury. Her touch was not gentle, and Mary bit her lip to keep from crying out. The woman spoke again, her tone critical, and Mary didn't need to understand the words to know she was being called foolish for traveling alone in the desert. As the argument continued, more of the band gathered. Mary saw women holding children back, their eyes filled with a mixture of fear and hatred that made her stomach clench. How many of them had lost family to white soldiers or settlers? How many saw her as a representative of all who had wronged them? Finally, Nantan made a pronouncement that seemed to settle matters, at least temporarily. The crowd began to disperse, though suspicious glances continued to be cast her way. Taza helped Mary from the travois, supporting her weight as the elderly woman led them to a small wickiup set somewhat apart from the others. Inside, the dwelling was surprisingly comfortable. Buffalo hides covered the ground, and baskets and pottery were arranged neatly along the edges. The woman, who Taza indicated was named Dahlia, pointed to a pile of blankets where Mary should rest. Over the following days, Mary began to understand the rhythm of camp life and the precariousness of the Apache's existence. Water was precious, hauled from a spring over a mile away. Every morning, women and older children made the journey with clay jars and animal bladders, returning with barely enough for drinking and cooking. Food was equally scarce. The men hunted, but game was increasingly rare, driven away by expanding ranches and the army's presence. Mary watched women gathering piñon nuts and grinding mesquite pods into flour, saw children searching for edible plants among the rocks. It was a far cry from the abundance she'd known at her father's ranch, where beef and supplies from town were plentiful. Dahlia tended Mary's ankle with grudging efficiency, applying new poultices and binding it tightly. She spoke constantly while she worked, as if Mary could understand, her tone alternating between scolding and what might have been rough sympathy. On the third day, Mary tried to make herself useful. She couldn't walk far, but she could sit and help with tasks. When she saw women grinding seeds, she gestured her willingness to help. The response was mixed. Some turned away. But one younger woman, heavily pregnant, showed her how to use the grinding stone. The work was harder than it looked. Within an hour, Mary's hands were blistered and her arms ached. The women watched her struggle with expressions ranging from amusement to respect. When she persisted despite the pain, the pregnant woman, who managed to convey that her name was Elu, smiled slightly and corrected her technique. That evening, as Mary helped sort beans for the meager evening meal, she became aware of a growing tension in the camp. Scouts had returned with news that made faces grave and voices urgent. She caught the word soldiers and felt her blood run cold. Taza found her later, his expression troubled. Through gestures and the few words they'd managed to teach each other, he conveyed that army patrols were increasing in the area. The band would need to move soon, but moving was dangerous with water sources so scarce. That night, Mary lay awake listening to the sounds of the camp. Somewhere, a baby cried and was quickly soothed. She heard the soft murmur of voices, the crackle of dying fires, the distant howl of coyotes. These people lived on the knife's edge of survival, and her presence only increased their danger. The next morning brought a crisis. The spring, their lifeline in this harsh land, had dropped to a trickle. Mary watched as women returned with jars only partially filled, their faces etched with worry. Children were given priority for water rations. But even so, lips were cracked and eyes dulled with thirst. An argument erupted near Nantan's wickiup. Several men gestured angrily in Mary's direction, their meaning clear. The white woman was another mouth to feed, another person consuming precious water. Why should they risk their children's lives for their enemy? Mary understood their logic even as it chilled her. She was a burden, a danger to them all. If soldiers came looking for her and found the camp. That afternoon, the situation worsened. A hunting party returned empty-handed, and the community's food stores were nearly exhausted. Mary gave her portion of the evening meal to Elu, who tried to refuse but was clearly hungry. The gesture earned her a surprised look from Dahlia and a nod from Taza. As darkness fell, Mary made a decision. She waited until the camp was quiet, then attempted to stand without her crutch. Her ankle protested but held her weight. She could walk, barely. If she left now, quietly, perhaps she could find her way to a settlement before the Apache were forced to make a choice between their survival and their honor. She had barely made it past the first wickiup when a hand fell on her shoulder. Taza stood behind her, his expression unreadable in the moonlight. He shook his head slowly and guided her back to Dahlia's wickiup. The next morning, he was gone. Dahlia conveyed through gestures that he'd gone to scout for water, searching for springs that might have been overlooked. Other men had dispersed in different directions on the same mission. It was a desperate gamble. In this drought, the chance of finding new water was slim. Mary threw herself into helping however she could. She watched the children while women foraged, helped repair baskets, even attempted to learn more Apache words. Elu proved a patient teacher, and slowly, Basic communication became possible. Through these halting conversations, Mary began to understand the depth of the Apache's grievances. Elu's husband had been killed in a massacre 2 years prior. Soldiers had attacked a peaceful camp, claiming they were pursuing raiders. Dahlia had lost 3 sons to various conflicts. Nearly every person in the camp carried similar wounds, yet they didn't harm her. Some remained hostile, but others began to accept her presence. When she shared her meager water ration with a feverish child, his mother touched Mary's hand in silent gratitude. When she helped Elu carry heavy baskets despite her injured ankle, other women began to include her in their conversations, even if she understood little. On the 5th day, Taza returned with good news. He'd found a small spring in a hidden canyon 2 days' travel north. It wasn't much, but it might sustain them until the rains came. The camp erupted in relief, and preparation for the move began immediately. But the celebration was short-lived. That evening, scouts brought word that a large cavalry patrol was moving through the valley to the east, directly in the path they would need to take to reach the new water source. The debate that night was fierce. Some argued for fighting, others for fleeing deeper into Mexico. Nantan listened to all sides, his weathered face grave. Finally, his eyes fell on Mary, and she knew without understanding the words that her fate was being decided. Taza spoke at length, gesturing between Mary and the direction of the soldiers. Others responded angrily, but he persisted, his voice calm but firm. When he finished, Nantan was quiet for a long moment before speaking. The decision was made. Taza would take Mary away, try to find a safe place for her that wouldn't endanger the band. It was exile for both of them. In a way, he was choosing her safety over his place with his people. That night, as the camp prepared to move at dawn, Mary found herself sitting with Elu and Dahlia. The older woman pressed a small leather pouch into her hands. Herbs for her ankle, she understood. Elu gave her a water gourd, precious beyond measure in this drought. "Thank you," Mary said in Apache, one of the phrases she'd learned. "For everything." Dahlia's stern face softened slightly. She said something Mary didn't understand, but Elu translated with gestures and the few English words she knew. "You have good heart, stay alive." As dawn broke over the desert, painting the rocks in shades of gold and red, the Apache band prepared to move north while Taza and Mary would head west, away from the soldiers and the water both. Mary looked back once at the camp that had sheltered her, at the people who had shown her kindness when they had every reason for hatred. The drought-stricken land stretched endlessly before them, and Mary knew their chances were slim. But as Taza helped her onto his horse, his touch careful of her injury, she felt something she hadn't expected in this harsh place. Hope, not just for survival, but for something more. Understanding, perhaps, or even peace between peoples who had known only war. The sun climbed higher, already brutal in its intensity, as they rode toward an uncertain future. Behind them, dust clouds marked the passage of the Apache band, while somewhere to the east, soldiers continued their relentless patrol, and in between, 2 unlikely companions faced the desert together, bound by necessity and something that might, given the chance, grow into trust. The red rocks of the canyonlands rose around them like ancient sentinels, their layered faces telling stories of epochs past. Taza led them through paths Mary would never have found alone, narrow passages between towering stone walls, hidden trails that wound through stands of pinon pine, creek beds long dry but still offering concealment from watching eyes. They had been traveling for 3 days since leaving the Apache camp, and Mary's ankle, though improved, still sent sharp reminders with each jostle of the horse. Taza walked beside the animal more often than he rode, scanning the horizon with the vigilance of one who had learned that danger could come from any direction. The land they traversed was a testament to nature's harsh beauty. Mesas stretched toward the sky, their flat tops seeming to scrape the clouds. Deep arroyos cut through the earth like wounds, their depths shadowed even at midday. And everywhere, the sun beat down with relentless intensity, turning the world into an oven of red rock and scorching sand. Their water was running dangerously low. The gourd Elu had given them was less than half full, and Taza had been giving Mary the larger share. She'd tried to refuse, but he'd simply walked away, making it clear the matter wasn't open for discussion. On the fourth day, they reached the remnants of what had once been a river. Now only scattered pools remained, green with algae and barely drinkable. Taza tested the water carefully before allowing Mary to drink, and even then, only small amounts. He knew, as she was learning, that bad water could kill as surely as no water at all. That evening, as they made camp in the shelter of a large boulder, Mary attempted to communicate something that had been weighing on her mind, using the Apache words she'd learned and gestures. She tried to tell Taza about her father, about the kind of man Josiah Whitman was. She needed him to understand why she'd fled. "Father," she said in Apache, then made a gesture of striking. "Bad man, hurt people." She pointed to herself, then made a running motion. "Had to go." Taza watched her intently, his dark eyes reflecting the small fire he'd built. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he began his own halting story, using simple words she might understand and accompanying gestures. He showed her 5 fingers, then pointed to himself as a child. His village, peaceful. Then he made the sign for soldiers, many soldiers. His gestures became violent, shooting, burning. He held up 3 fingers, pointed to himself, then drew them across his throat. 3 brothers, dead. His parents, too. Only his sister and he had survived, hidden by their grandmother in a storage pit. Mary felt tears sliding down her cheeks. She understood now why Dahlia and the others had looked at her with such suspicion. How could they not, when people who looked like her had brought such devastation? "I'm sorry," she whispered in English, then repeated it in the Apache words she knew. "Sorry." "Very sorry." Taza studied her for a moment, then did something unexpected. He reached across the small space between them and briefly touched her hand, a gesture of acknowledgement, perhaps even forgiveness. That night, the temperature plummeted as it always did in the high desert. They had only 2 blankets between them, and Mary shivered despite being closest to the fire. She woke sometime in the deep night to find that Taza had moved closer, not touching but near enough that she could feel his warmth. It was practical, she told herself. Survival. But her heart beat faster nonetheless. The next day brought them to more difficult terrain. The horse struggled over loose rock and up steep inclines. Taza had to lead it carefully, and progress was slow. Mary insisted on walking part of the way. Despite her ankle's protests, she could see the strain on both man and animal, and refused to add to it more than necessary. It was near sunset when they saw the dust cloud on the horizon. Taza's entire body tensed, and he quickly led them into a cluster of large boulders. He helped Mary dismount and positioned her in a crevice between 2 rocks, then climbed higher for a better view. When he returned, his face was grim. Through gestures and their limited shared vocabulary, he conveyed that riders were approaching. Many riders, moving fast. Soldiers, most likely, though they could also be civilians forming a search party. They waited in tense silence as the sun died and darkness crept across the land. The dust cloud grew closer, and soon Mary could hear the distant thunder of hooves. Taza had unsaddled the horse and was holding its muzzle, ready to prevent any sound that might betray them. The riders passed less than a quarter mile from their position. In the moonlight, Mary could see the glint of metal, weapons, military tack, soldiers indeed. She found herself holding her breath, pressing back against the cold stone as if she could melt into it. Long after the sound of horses faded, Taza remained watchful. Only when he was certain they were gone did he relax slightly. But he decided they would stay hidden until dawn rather than risk moving in the darkness. They huddled together in the rocks, sharing what little warmth they could. Mary was acutely aware of Taza's presence, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the way he stayed alert even while resting. She thought of the men back home, her father, Samuel Harrington, the ranch hands who leered at her when they thought no one was looking, None of them had ever made her feel as safe as this Apache warrior who had every reason to distrust her kind. Dawn came slowly, painting the world in soft pastels before the sun's full fury returned. They moved carefully from their hiding place, Taza scouting ahead before bringing up the horse. The close call had shaken them both, a reminder that danger pursued them from all sides. As they traveled that day, following a dry stream bed that offered some concealment, Mary noticed Taza was leading them more north than west. When she questioned him with gestures, he pointed to distant mountains and made the sign for water, but his expression was troubled, and she sensed there was more to his decision than just the search for water. That evening, as Taza tended to her ankle, the swelling had gone down considerably. Though it remained painful, Mary summoned her courage for what she needed to say. She'd been practicing the words in Apache all day. "You go back," she said carefully. "Your people, I go alone." His hand stilled on the bandage. He looked up at her, his expression unreadable. "Soldiers look for me," she continued, mixing Apache and gestures. "Danger for you. You save me. Enough. You go." Taza finished wrapping her ankle before responding. When he did, his voice was firm. "No," he said in English, one of the few words he'd learned from her. Then, in Apache, words she didn't fully understand but whose meaning was clear, he would not abandon her. "Why?" she asked, and was surprised when her voice broke on the word. He was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the darkening landscape. When he spoke, it was slowly, choosing words she might understand. He talked about honor, about choosing to save a life rather than take one. He gestured to the land around them, spoke of death, too much death. Then he looked at her directly and said something that needed no translation. The look in his eyes spoke of a connection neither of them fully understood yet. That night, a sudden storm rolled in from the mountains. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in minutes, and lightning split the sky in brilliant, terrifying displays. They took shelter under an overhanging rock, but the wind drove rain sideways, soaking them both. Mary's teeth chattered uncontrollably as she pressed against the rock wall. Without hesitation, Taza pulled her against him, wrapping both blankets around them. It was the first time they'd been this close, and despite the circumstances, Mary was intensely aware of every point of contact. "Will it hurt?" she whispered suddenly, the words escaping before she could stop them. She wasn't even sure what she was asking about: the storm, their journey, the growing feelings she couldn't name. Taza's arms tightened slightly around her. "Shh," he murmured, one of the universal sounds that needed no translation. Then, in carefully pronounced English, "Be gentle." She realized he'd remembered her words from that first night when he'd tended her injuries. The memory brought tears to her eyes, though she couldn't say why. The storm passed as quickly as it had come, leaving the world washed clean and smelling of sage and wet earth. They stayed huddled together as the stars emerged, neither willing to break the contact first. Mary felt something fundamental shifting inside her, like tectonic plates realigning. Everything she'd been taught, every prejudice instilled by her upbringing, seemed insignificant compared to this moment. Two people finding warmth and comfort in each other against the vast indifference of the wilderness. When morning came, they packed in comfortable silence. Taza helped her onto the horse, his hands lingering perhaps a moment longer than necessary at her waist. As they set off toward the distant mountains, Mary realized that somewhere in the past days, her fear had transformed into trust, and trust was beginning to transform into something else entirely. The landscape ahead was daunting, endless miles of desert before the mountains that might offer water and shelter. Behind them, soldiers searched. Her father would not give up easily. She knew he would see her flight as a betrayal, a stain on his honor that must be corrected. But as she watched Taza navigate the treacherous terrain with quiet competence, as she felt the solid presence of him walking beside the horse, Mary found she wasn't afraid. Whatever lay ahead, thirst, soldiers, the censure of two worlds that would never understand what was growing between them, she would face it. The sun climbed higher, already fierce despite the storm's passing. In the distance, a red-tailed hawk circled lazily on thermal currents, and two unlikely companions continued their journey through a land that tested all who dared traverse it, bound now by more than just survival. The attack came at dawn, when the world balanced between night and day. Mary woke to Taza's hand over her mouth, his body tense as a drawn bowstring. She heard it then, the muffled sounds of horses approaching through the canyon where they'd made camp. Not soldiers. The movements were too careless, too loud. Taza's eyes confirmed what she suspected. Bandits. Probably prospectors turned outlaws. Common enough in these lawless territories where gold fever drove men to desperation. There were 3 of them. Rough-looking men with weak old beards and clothes stained with sweat and dirt. They hadn't spotted Taza and Mary yet, hidden as they were behind a cluster of boulders, but they were examining the remains of last night's campfire. "Someone's been here recent," one said, his voice carrying clearly in the still morning air. "Apache, by the look of it." "Could be that runaway girl the Whitman spread is looking for," another suggested. "Heard tell she got herself caught by Indians. Might be a reward if she's still breathing." Mary's blood ran cold. Her father had put out word, possibly offered money. These men would have no interest in her welfare beyond what coin she might bring. Taza was already moving, silent as shadow. He pressed the horse's reins into Mary's hands, gesturing for her to stay hidden. Before she could protest, he was gone, melting into the rocks like smoke. The first bandit never knew what hit him. One moment he was examining tracks in the dust. The next, Taza's arm was around his throat, dropping him unconscious. But the man's fall alerted the others. "Jenkins?" The second man spun, reaching for his pistol. The third was already moving, trying to flank Taza's position. The fight was brutal and quick. Taza moved like water, flowing around the men's clumsy attacks. But these were desperate men, armed and dangerous. A knife flashed in the morning sun, and Mary saw blood bloom on Taza's shoulder. She couldn't stay hidden. Grabbing a rock, she emerged from cover just as the third bandit raised his gun toward Taza's back. The rock connected with the man's temple with a sickening thud, and he crumpled. The remaining bandit, seeing his companions down, made a choice. He scrambled for his horse, spurring it viciously as he fled down the canyon. Taza made no move to pursue, instead pressing his hand to his bleeding shoulder. "You're hurt," Mary said, rushing to him. The knife had carved a deep gash along his upper arm, blood flowing freely. They worked quickly to treat the wound. Mary tore strips from her petticoat while Taza gathered herbs he'd collected days earlier. She cleaned the wound with their precious water, trying not to think about how little remained, then packed it with the crushed herbs before binding it tightly. "We need to move," Taza said in Apache, gesturing urgently. The fleeing bandit would likely return with others, and their position was compromised. They left immediately, Taza insisting on walking despite his injury. The horse carried their few supplies, and Mary, though she protested that she could walk. Her ankle had healed considerably, but Taza would hear none of it. The day grew hot quickly, and Taza's injury began to tell. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and Mary noticed him stumbling occasionally. By midday, she could stand it no longer. "Stop," she commanded, using one of the firm Apache words Dahlia had taught her. "Rest now." To her surprise, Taza obeyed, perhaps recognizing the wisdom in her words or simply too exhausted to argue. They found shade beneath an overhang, and Mary insisted on checking his wound. The herbs had helped, but the exertion had started it bleeding again. As she worked to rebind it, Taza watched her with an expression she couldn't read. When she finished, he caught her hand. "Mary," he said softly, then continued in a mixture of Apache and the English words he'd learned, "You, brave, saved Taza." She felt heat rise to her cheeks. "You saved me first, many times." They were close, so close she could see flecks of gold in his dark eyes. The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. Then Taza leaned forward, pressing his forehead gently against hers, a gesture of gratitude and perhaps something more. They traveled more slowly that afternoon, both aware that Taza needed rest, but equally aware that staying still meant danger. As the sun began its descent, they found shelter in a small box canyon with high walls that would hide their fire. That night, as Mary helped Taza remove his shirt to properly clean and dress his wound, she found herself studying the scars that marked his body. Each one told a story of survival in this harsh land. Her fingers traced near one particularly old scar on his chest, and he caught her hand gently. "Long ago," he said quietly, "boy, learn to be warrior." She understood. Even his initiation into manhood had involved pain and struggle. Everything about this land demanded strength, extracted a price for survival. "My world," she said slowly, trying to find words they both understood, "is soft, easy, but—" She gestured to her heart, then to the vast wilderness around them. "Empty. This—" She struggled for the right word. "This is real." Taza nodded, seeming to understand. He spoke then of his people's connection to the land, using simple words and gestures. The mountains were not just rock but sacred spaces. The rivers, when they ran, were lifelines that connected all things. Even the harsh desert had purpose, teaching strength and resilience. As the fire died to embers, Mary found herself sharing more about her life before. She told him about the big house that felt like a prison, about her father's coldness, about the suitor who saw her as property to be acquired. Taza listened intently, occasionally asking for clarification when her mix of English and Apache became too complex. "Why you?" she finally asked, the question that had been burning in her mind. "Why save me? Your people need you." Taza was quiet for a long time, stirring the coals with a stick. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "First time," he said carefully. "See you in sand. Think of sister. Could not leave." He paused, searching for words. "Then, you different. Not like other whites. You see Apache as people. You try, you—" He touched his chest, over his heart. "You have good spirit." Mary felt tears prick her eyes. "I was taught terrible things about your people, but everything I was taught was a lie. Some Apache bad," Taza admitted. "Some whites bad, but people are people, good and bad in all." It was a simple philosophy, but profound in its truth. They sat in comfortable silence, the night sounds of the desert surrounding them, the distant call of an owl, the rustle of small creatures, the whisper of wind through stone. "What happens to us?" Mary asked softly. "Where do we go?" Taza looked at her, his expression serious. "Mountains," he said, pointing north. "No place, hidden, safe, but—" he hesitated. "You choose, can take you to White Town. You be safe there." The offer hung between them. Mary knew he was giving her a choice, return to her world or continue into the unknown with him. It should have been an easy decision. Among her own people, she would have comfort, safety, the chance to start over in a place where her father couldn't reach. But looking at Taza, at this man who had risked everything for her, who treated her with more genuine respect than she'd ever known, she realized the choice had already been made. "With you," she said firmly. "I stay with you." Something shifted in Taza's expression, relief, joy, and perhaps the dawn of something deeper. He reached out and took her hand, his touch gentle despite the calluses from a lifetime of survival. "Hard life," he warned. "Always running, always hiding. Two worlds against us." "I know," Mary said. "But alone in my world or together in yours, I choose together." That night, they slept side by side, no longer maintaining the careful distance of the previous nights. Mary woke once to find Taza's arm around her, protective even in sleep. She nestled closer, feeling safer than she had in years. Dawn brought new challenges. Taza's wound had stiffened overnight, and he moved carefully. They had perhaps a day's worth of water left, and the mountains still seemed impossibly distant, but neither spoke of turning back. As they prepared to leave, Mary noticed dust on the horizon, riders, moving fast, too far to identify, but coming their direction. Taza saw it too, his body tensing. "Go," he said urgently. "Now." They pushed hard that day, Taza setting a pace that Mary knew must be agony for him. His wound had opened again, blood seeping through the bandage. But he didn't slow. The dust cloud behind them grew closer, relentless as death itself. By late afternoon, they reached the foothills of the mountains. Taza led them into increasingly rough terrain, following paths Mary couldn't even see. The horse struggled, and eventually Taza made the difficult decision to release it. "Cannot go where we go," he explained, removing their supplies and giving the animal a slap to send it running. "Better chance free." They climbed on foot as darkness fell, Taza pulling Mary up steep sections despite his injury. Behind them, she could hear sounds of pursuit, men's voices, the clatter of horses on stone. Their pursuers had found their trail. Finally, Taza led them into a narrow crack in the cliff face, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Inside, it opened into a small cave, invisible from outside. They pressed back into the darkness as voices grew closer. "Trail ends here," someone said, frustratingly near. "They must have doubled back." "Or climbed," another voice suggested. "But in the dark, be suicide." The search continued for what felt like hours. Mary hardly dared breathe, pressed against Taza in the darkness. His hand found hers, squeezing reassuringly even as she felt the fever beginning in his body from his wound. Eventually, the voices faded. The searchers had given up, at least for the night, but Mary knew they would return with daylight, and Taza was in no condition to run further. In the darkness of the cave, she held him as his body shook with chills. The wound was infected, she was certain. Without proper medicine, without rest and water, she might lose him just as she'd found him. "Stay with me," she whispered, not knowing if he understood. "Please, Taza, stay with me." He murmured something in Apache, his hand tightening on hers. And there, in the darkness, with danger all around and the future uncertain, Mary began to understand the true price of choosing love over safety, freedom over comfort. But holding Taza as he fought his fever, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her palm, she knew she would make the same choice again. The night stretched ahead, long and uncertain, but they had survived this far against all odds. Together, they would face whatever dawn might bring. The morning sun revealed their precarious position. Taza's fever had broken during the night, but he remained weak, his wound angry and inflamed despite Mary's constant care. From their cave's hidden entrance, she could see the search party had made camp below, clearly intending to continue their hunt. But worse was approaching from the east, a dust cloud that could only mean one thing: military cavalry, likely a full patrol. Mary's heart sank as she recognized the disciplined movement pattern. These weren't random bounty hunters. This was an organized search. "Soldiers," she whispered to Taza, who struggled to sit up despite her protests. He looked out, his face grave. 20 men at least, with a Pima scout leading them. The army often employed rival tribes to track Apache, knowing they possessed skills white soldiers could never match. "Must go," Taza said, though moving clearly cost him. "They find us here." Mary knew what he couldn't bring himself to say. If caught, she would be rescued and returned to her father. Taza would be hanged or shot on sight, the standard fate for any Apache accused of kidnapping a white woman, regardless of the truth. They gathered their meager supplies and slipped out the back of the cave through a passage Taza had discovered during the night. Every movement sent fresh agony through his wounded shoulder, but he made no sound. Mary supported him as best she could, though the rocky terrain made progress treacherous. By midday, they had managed to put some distance between themselves and the searchers, but at a terrible cost. Taza's strength was failing, and their water was gone. The sun beat down mercilessly, and Mary could feel her own reserves depleting. They found temporary shelter beneath an outcropping of rock. Taza collapsed more than sat. His breathing labored. Mary examined his wound and had to bite back a cry of despair. Red streaks were spreading from the gash, blood poisoning. Without proper medicine, He would die. Go, Taza said weakly, pushing her away. Fine soldiers, tell them I forced you. You live. No, Mary said fiercely. We survive together or not at all. She left him protesting weakly and searched the surrounding area desperately. Dahlia had taught her some plant medicine during her stay with the Apache, and she prayed she could find what was needed. After an hour of searching, she located prickly pear cactus and a small amount of desert willow. Not ideal, but it would have to do. As she prepared the poultice, she heard horses approaching, moving carefully. She peered around the rocks. A squad of cavalry had separated from the main group and was heading directly toward their position. The Pima scout was reading signs in the dirt, following their trail with inevitable skill. Mary made a decision that went against every instinct for self-preservation. She stepped out from cover, hands raised, directly into the soldier's path. "Don't shoot," she called out. "I'm Mary Whitman." The soldiers reined up sharply, weapons drawn but not yet aimed. The sergeant, a grizzled man with sun-weathered features, dismounted cautiously. "Miss Whitman, your father's got half the territory looking for you. Are you hurt? Where's the Apache that took you?" Mary drew herself up, summoning every bit of authority her privileged upbringing had given her. "No one took me, Sergeant. I left of my own accord. And I'll thank you to lower those weapons." "Ma'am," the sergeant said patiently, as if speaking to a child. "We know you were taken by hostiles. It's all right now. You're safe. Just tell us where he is." "I told you," Mary said firmly. "I was not taken. I was saved. There's a difference, though I don't expect you to understand it." The Pima scout said something in his own language, pointing toward the rocks where Taza was hidden. Several soldiers started forward, but Mary stepped directly in their path. "The man you're hunting saved my life when I was dying in the desert. He's injured and needs help, not persecution." "Ma'am," the sergeant's tone hardened. "You need to step aside. We have our orders." "Your orders are based on lies," Mary shot back. "I'll testify to any judge, any court, that this man is my protector, not my captor." The sergeant sighed. "With all due respect, Miss Whitman, you've been through an ordeal. You're not thinking clearly. The Apache has obviously influenced—" His words were cut short by movement in the rocks. Taza emerged, walking unsteadily but with dignity. He'd heard the confrontation and refused to let Mary face danger alone. His hands were raised, showing he was unarmed. "No!" Mary rushed to him, placing herself between Taza and the raised rifles. "You can't. He's done nothing wrong." "Stand aside, ma'am," one of the younger soldiers ordered, his rifle trained on Taza. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." "I'm not moving," Mary declared. "You'll have to shoot me first." The tension stretched taut as a bowstring. Then Taza spoke, his English careful but clear. "Let her go," he said to the soldiers. "Take her safe. I surrender." "No!" Mary turned to him, tears streaming. "I won't let them." Taza touched her face gently. "You must live," he said softly. "Your path, different from mine." The moment of distraction was all the soldiers needed. Two of them grabbed Mary, pulling her away despite her struggles. Others moved toward Taza, rifles ready. What happened next would be debated in military reports for months. The official version claimed the Apache made a threatening move. Mary would swear until her dying day that Taza had simply stumbled, his wound finally overwhelming him. The shot was sharp and final in the desert air. "No!" Mary's scream echoed off the canyon walls as Taza fell. She broke free from the soldier's grip with strength born of desperation, rushing to where he lay. Blood spread beneath him, but his eyes were still aware, still focused on her face. She cradled his head in her lap, her tears falling on his face. "Why?" she sobbed. "Why did you come out?" He managed a weak smile. "Could not. Let you face. Alone." His hand found hers. "You free now. Live. Be happy. Not without you," she whispered. "Please, Taza. Hold on, please." The sergeant had dismounted, his face troubled. Up close, he could see what his men's haste had obscured. This Apache was already gravely wounded, likely dying from infection. The shooting had been unnecessary. "Get the medical supplies," he ordered tersely. One soldier moved to comply, though they all knew it was too late. Taza's breathing grew labored. He spoke in Apache, words Mary had learned in their time together, words of love, of hope for her future, of gratitude for the brief time they'd shared. "Save him," Mary begged the sergeant. "Please, he's a good man. The best man I've ever known." The sergeant knelt beside them, his expression softening. He'd seen enough death to recognize its approach. "I'm sorry, miss, the wound's too severe. Even if we could get him to a fort surgeon." Taza squeezed Mary's hand weakly. "No sadness," he managed in English. "We had time, more than expected." "It's not enough," Mary said fiercely. "It's not fair. Life, not fair," Taza agreed. "But we found something beautiful." His eyes began to lose focus. Mary leaned down, pressing her forehead to his as he had done days ago. "I love you," she whispered in Apache. "My heart is yours, always." A smile ghosted across his lips. "And mine, yours, forever." The desert wind picked up, carrying the scent of sage and the promise of distant rain. Taza's hand relaxed in hers, and Mary knew he was gone. She held him still, rocking gently, keening a grief too large for words. The soldiers stood awkwardly, weapons lowered. Even the Pima scout looked away, respecting her mourning. The sergeant finally approached, speaking gently. "Miss Whitman, we need to go. Your father—" "My father can go to hell," Mary said quietly, her voice empty of everything but grief. "This man showed me more kindness and respect in 2 weeks than my father has in 19 years. She looked up at the sergeant, her eyes blazing through tears. "I want him buried properly, with dignity. He was a warrior and deserves honor." The sergeant hesitated. Regulations were clear about Apache dead. But something in Mary's face, in the obvious bond between her and the fallen warrior, moved him. "We'll see it done," he said quietly. "You have my word." They buried Taza as the sun set. In the Apache way, as best Mary could direct, she sang the morning songs Dahlia had taught her, her voice breaking but determined. The soldiers watched in uncomfortable silence, faced with evidence that their enemy was human, capable of love and sacrifice. As they prepared to leave, Mary took one last look at the grave marked with stones in the old way. The sergeant approached, offering her his canteen. "For what it's worth," he said quietly. "I'm sorry. I've fought the Apache for 10 years, but this wasn't right." Mary accepted the water but said nothing. What was there to say? That 2 worlds' hatred had killed the best man she'd ever known? That fear and prejudice had destroyed something rare and beautiful? As they rode toward the fort, Mary felt hollow, emptied of everything but determination. She would tell their story. She would make sure people knew that an Apache warrior had chosen compassion over vengeance, that love could grow even in the harshest ground. The stars emerged one by one, the same stars she and Taza had watched together. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, a lonely sound that matched the ache in her heart. But beneath the grief, a small flame of gratitude flickered. They had found each other against all odds. They had shared something real and true, and that, despite everything, was a kind of miracle. Mary's scream shattered the desert silence as she pulled away from the soldiers, rushing back to where Taza lay. The bullet had struck his chest, blood spreading dark across his shirt. But his eyes, those deep, knowing eyes, still held life. "No, no, no," she whispered, pressing her hands against the wound, trying desperately to stem the flow. "You stay with me. You hear me? You stay!" The sergeant barked orders behind her. "Henderson, get the medical supplies. Morrison, build a fire. Move!" To his credit, the sergeant seemed to recognize the gravity of his man's error. The young soldier who'd fired stood frozen, his face pale as he realized what he'd done. Shot an unarmed, already wounded man who posed no threat. Mary barely noticed the activity around her. Her world had narrowed to Taza's face, to keeping pressure on the wound, to willing him to live with every fiber of her being. Foolish woman, Taza whispered, a ghost of his usual gentle teasing in his voice despite the pain. Should have stayed hidden. And let them take me, let you die alone. Mary's tears fell on his face. Never. We're in this together, remember? The soldier Henderson returned with medical supplies, basic field dressings, nothing near what was needed. Mary snatched them anyway, working with desperate efficiency. She'd learned enough from Dahlia and from tending Taza's first wound to know what to do, even if she feared it wouldn't be enough. The fort's a day's ride, the sergeant said quietly. There's a surgeon there. He won't make it a day, Mary said flatly, not looking up from her work. I need willow bark for the pain, yarrow for the bleeding, desert marigold if you can find it. She rattled off the list Dahlia had drilled into her. And clean water. All of it you have. The sergeant hesitated, clearly torn between following protocol and the unusual situation before him. Finally, humanity won. You heard her, he told his men. Fan out and find those plants. Henderson, you know some field medicine. Help her. As the soldiers scattered to search, Mary worked to stabilize Taza. The bullet had missed his heart, a small mercy, but had clearly damaged his lung. His breathing was labored, each breath a struggle. Why? She asked him softly as she worked. Why did you show yourself? Taza's hand found hers, weak but insistent. Could not. Let them take you. Your father. Bad man. You know this. I would have figured something out, Mary insisted, though they both knew it was a lie. Once in military custody, she would have been returned to her father regardless of her wishes. The soldiers returned with what plants they could find. Mary prepared the medicines as Dahlia had taught her, her hands steady despite her inner turmoil. Henderson assisted, clearly impressed by her knowledge. Where'd you learn this? He asked quietly. From people you call savages, Mary replied curtly. People who know more about survival and healing than your fort surgeons. Night fell as they worked. The sergeant had made the decision to camp rather than risk moving Taza in his condition. It was a choice that could end his military career, harboring an Apache. But something about the situation, perhaps Mary's fierce devotion or the obvious injustice of the shooting, had moved him. Through the long night, Mary fought for Taza's life. She cleaned the wound, packed it with healing herbs, and forced willow bark tea between his lips for the pain and fever. When his breathing grew too labored, she elevated his head against her chest, holding him upright to ease the strain. The soldiers kept their distance, setting up a perimeter but leaving Mary to her work. She heard their whispered conversations, their growing discomfort with what they'd witnessed. These men had been told they were hunting a dangerous kidnapper. Instead, they'd found something that challenged everything they'd been taught about the Apache. Near dawn, Taza's fever spiked dangerously. He thrashed in delirium, speaking rapid Apache that Mary only partially understood. Words about his family, his sister, the massacres he'd witnessed. She held him through it, whispering soothing words in his language, bathing his face with precious water. Please, she prayed to any power that might listen. Christian God, Apache spirits, the indifferent desert itself. Please don't take him. We've come so far. We deserve a chance. As the sun rose, Taza's fever broke. His breathing, while still labored, grew more regular. Mary nearly wept with relief when his eyes opened, lucid and aware. Still here, he whispered. Always, she replied. The sergeant approached, his expression troubled. Miss Whitman, we need to make some decisions. My orders are to bring you back, but... He gestured to Taza. This situation is complicated. It's not complicated at all, Mary said firmly. I won't leave him, and I won't let you take him prisoner. Ma'am, be reasonable. He needs proper medical care. The fort will hang him, Mary interrupted. Or at best, ship him to Florida with the other Apache prisoners. Either way, it's a death sentence. The sergeant sighed heavily. He was a career soldier, but also a man with a conscience. What would you have me do? I can't just let an Apache warrior go free. My men saw what happened here. There'll be reports. Mary stood, facing him squarely. Then report the truth, that you found a wounded Apache who had saved a white woman's life, that he posed no threat, that one of your men shot him without cause. Let the generals sort out that mess. And you? I'm going with him, Mary said simply. Wherever that leads. The sergeant studied her for a long moment. Your father's a powerful man, Miss Whitman. He won't stop looking. Then he'll have to keep looking, Mary replied. Because I'm never going back to that life. A commotion from the sentries interrupted them. Riders approaching, not military. Mary's heart sank as she recognized the lead figure, Samuel Harrington himself, accompanied by hired guns. Well, well, Harrington said as he dismounted, his cold eyes taking in the scene. The runaway bride, playing nurse to her savage captor. Your father will be most disappointed. Mary. Mr. Harrington. The sergeant stepped forward. This is a military operation. You have no authority here. Harrington smiled thinly. On the contrary, Sergeant, I have every authority. A letter from the territorial governor, countersigned by Colonel Matthews at Fort Buchanan. He produced a document. The girl comes with me, and the Apache hangs. Simple as that. Mary moved protectively closer to Taza, who was struggling to sit up despite his injury. I'm not going anywhere with you. You seem to be under the misapprehension that you have a choice. Harrington said, Your father signed a marriage contract. You belong to me now. I belong to no one, Mary spat. Harrington's face darkened. Sergeant, arrest that Apache. I'll deal with my fiancé's rebellion privately. The sergeant hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. His men shifted uneasily, hands on weapons but uncertain. The tension crackled like lightning before a storm. Then Taza spoke, his voice weak but clear. Take me, he said in English. Let her go free. Please? No, Mary whirled on him. Don't you dare give up now. We've come too far. Mary. Taza caught her hand. Look at me. She did, tears streaming in his eyes. She saw love, resignation, and a terrible resolve. You must live, he said softly. Find happiness. For both of us. I can't, she sobbed. Not without you. You can, he insisted. You are strongest woman I know. Like mountain, like storm. You will survive. Harrington had heard enough. Touching, Sergeant. Follow your orders. Now. But before anyone could move, the sound of approaching horses filled the air again. This time, it was Apache. A war party 20 strong, painted and armed, emerging from the rocks like ghosts. Everyone froze. The soldiers and Harrington's men found themselves vastly outnumbered, surrounded by warriors who could pick them off before they could mount a defense. An elderly Apache warrior rode forward. Nantan. Mary realized with shock. Taza's chief had come himself. Nantan surveyed the scene, his ancient eyes taking in Taza's condition, Mary's protective stance, the white men's fear. He spoke in Apache, his voice carrying absolute authority. He says, Taza translated weakly, that I have brought enough trouble, but also, he paused, listening. That courage deserves recognition, even foolish courage. Nantan addressed the soldiers directly, in accented but clear English. This warrior saved white woman, showed mercy when he could have taken vengeance. You shot him without cause. Apache have long memories, but also honor. Today, we balance scales. He gestured to his warriors. You leave, now, all of you. Take nothing but horses and lives. The woman chooses her path freely. Harrington sputtered. You can't. This is American territory. I have legal documents. Nantan's smile was sharp as a blade. Your papers mean nothing here. Only strength and wisdom matter. You have neither. The sergeant, proving himself a practical man, ordered his soldiers to mount up. Mr. Harrington, I suggest you comply. We're outnumbered and outpositioned. This is outrageous, Harrington raged. When the army hears of this, the army will hear that Apache warriors showed more honor than white soldiers, the sergeant said quietly. That's what my report will say. He looked at Mary. Ma'am, the choice is yours. Come with us. Or I stay, Mary said without hesitation. This is where I belong. Harrington made one last attempt, reaching for Mary. Your father gave you to me. You're mine by law. Taza, despite his weakness, managed to raise the pistol someone had left near him. Touch her and die, he said simply. Surrounded by Apache warriors with drawn bows, Harrington had no choice but to retreat. As the white men rode away, he shouted back, This isn't over. Whitman will burn the whole territory to get his daughter back. When they were gone, Nantan dismounted and approached. He studied Mary with those penetrating eyes, then spoke at length with Taza. Finally, he nodded. You have earned respect, he told Mary in English. Taza chose you over his people. You chose him over yours. This is powerful medicine. He paused. But path ahead is hard. 2 peoples, 1 heart. Much pain in this. I understand, Mary said. But a life without him would be no life at all. Nantan nodded slowly. Then you come. We heal him properly. After, he shrugged. After, spirits decide. As the Apache fashioned a travois for Taza, gentler and more efficient than anything Mary could have managed, she knelt beside him. You came back, she whispered. Your people came back for you. For us, Taza corrected. Nantan, he understands now. What we have, rare, worth protecting. As they prepared to leave, the sun climbed higher in the desert sky. Mary looked back once at the spot where her old life had effectively ended. Then she turned forward, toward an uncertain but chosen future. The journey to the Apache stronghold was slow but careful. Warriors scouted ahead and behind, ensuring no pursuit. Mary rode beside Taza's travois, never leaving his sight. When they stopped to rest, she was the one who tended his wounds, the Apache women teaching her new medicines and techniques. By nightfall, they reached a hidden canyon deep in the mountains, a place no white man had ever seen. As Taza was carried to a shelter for proper healing, Mary stood at the canyon's edge, looking out at the vast desert spread below. She had chosen love over safety, freedom over comfort, an uncertain future over a prescribed path. The price had been high, nearly fatal, but as Taza's hand found hers, weak but warm and alive, she knew she would make the same choice again. The stars emerged one by one in the darkening sky, the same stars that had witnessed their journey from strangers to partners to something deeper than words could express. And somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. Not lonely this time, but calling to its pack, celebrating survival against all odds. The winter had been hard but healing. In the hidden canyon stronghold, Taza slowly recovered his strength under the care of the medicine woman and Mary's devoted attention. His lung had healed, though he would always carry the scars, both visible and invisible, of their ordeal. Mary had thrown herself into learning the Apache ways, her hands growing calloused from work, her skin bronzed by the sun, her Apache vocabulary expanding daily. Now, as spring painted the desert in brilliant blooms of gold and purple, they stood on a high ridge overlooking the vast expanse of the territory. The morning sun cast long shadows across the red rocks, and an eagle circled lazily overhead. A good omen. Dahlia had told them, "My father won't stop," Mary said quietly, breaking their comfortable silence. "The soldiers, Harrington, they'll keep coming." Taza nodded, his arm around her waist. "I know. Nantan knows. This place." He gestured to the canyon below, where the band made their camp. Not safe forever. Over the past months, they'd received word through the Apache network of scouts and traders. Josiah Whitman had indeed burned the territory, as Harrington had threatened, offering increasingly large rewards for his daughter's return. The army had intensified patrols, and several bands had been forced to relocate to avoid detection. "There is another way," Taza said carefully, watching her face. "Mexico. Some bands go south, beyond reach of American soldiers." Mary considered this. Mexico meant true exile. leaving behind any possibility of reconciliation with her former world. But what remained for her there anyway? A father who saw her as property, a society that would never accept her choices, a life of suffocating restrictions. Together? She asked. Always together, Taza confirmed, pulling her closer. That evening, they met with Nantan and the council. The old chief had grown frailer over the winter, and everyone knew his time was limited. The question of succession hung heavy. Taza was respected, had proven himself many times over, but his choice of Mary complicated matters. You have brought both blessing and curse, Nantan told them bluntly. The woman has strong medicine, good heart. But whites follow her like vultures follow death. The band must decide. The debate that followed was lengthy and sometimes heated. Mary understood enough now to follow most of it. Some argued for casting them out. Let them find their own way rather than endanger everyone. Others, particularly Elu and some of the younger people, spoke of the changing world, the need for new paths. Finally, old Dahlia stood. Her word carried weight as the eldest woman, keeper of traditions. She spoke at length about adaptation, about how the Apache had always survived by changing with circumstances. Then she looked directly at Mary. You are Apache now, she said in carefully pronounced English. Not by blood, by choice, by sacrifice, by love. This stronger than blood. The vote, when it came, was close but clear. Taza and Mary could stay, but the band would move south, seeking new territories away from the increasing American pressure. It was exile for everyone, in a way, but also hope for survival. Preparations began immediately. The spring migration would be challenging. Water sources mapped, supplies gathered, the elderly and young prepared for hard travel. Mary worked alongside the other women, no longer an outsider but an integral part of the community's fabric. One evening, as she helped Elu with her young son, born during the winter and named Hope in Apache, a commotion arose from the sentries, riders approaching under a white flag. Mary's heart sank when she recognized the lead figure, her father, accompanied by only 2 men. Josiah Whitman looked older, grayer, as if the months of searching had aged him years. Nantan agreed to the parley, though warriors stood ready. Josiah's eyes found Mary immediately, widening at her transformation. Gone was the delicate ranch daughter. In her place stood a woman of strength and purpose, dressed in Apache clothing, her skin kissed by sun and wind. Mary Elizabeth, he said, his voice rough with emotion. My God, what have they done to you? They've done nothing but show me kindness, Mary replied calmly. More than I ever knew at home. This is madness, Josiah said. You're my daughter. You belong with your own kind, not living like a savage. Choose your words carefully, Taza warned, stepping beside Mary. His English had improved dramatically over the months. You are guest here, unwelcome guest. Josiah's face darkened. You're the one who stole her, filled her head with nonsense. He saved my life, Mary interjected, which is more than you ever did. You would have sold me to Harrington like livestock. I was securing your future. You were securing your business connections, Mary shot back. I was never a daughter to you, just another asset to manage. Father and daughter faced each other across a chasm wider than the physical space between them. Finally, Josiah's shoulders sagged. Your mother would be heartbroken, he said quietly. My mother died trying to please you. Mary replied, her voice gentler now. She never got to live her own life. I won't make the same mistake. If you leave with them, Josiah said, you can never come back. I'll have to declare you dead. The law, society. They won't accept this. Mary felt Taza's hand find hers, steady and reassuring. Then declare me dead. Mary Whitman is dead. I'm someone new now, someone who chooses her own path. Josiah looked between them, perhaps seeing for the first time the genuine connection there. Do you love him? He asked suddenly. With everything I am. Mary answered without hesitation. And does he treat you well? Like an equal, like a partner, like I matter. Tears stung her eyes. All things you never did. Josiah was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into his coat and withdrew a leather pouch. Your mother's jewelry, he said gruffly. And some gold. It's what she would have wanted you to have. Mary stared, shocked by this unexpected gesture. Father? I'm not a good man, Josiah said quietly. I know that, but I'm not a monster either. If this is truly your choice. He struggled with the words. Then go with my blessing, such as it is. He turned to Taza. You harm her, and I'll hunt you to the ends of the earth. Taza nodded solemnly. Would expect nothing less, but harming her would be harming myself. We are one now. Without another word, Josiah Whitman turned and rode away. Never looking back, Mary watched him go, feeling a complex mix of sadness, relief, and closure. That part of her life was truly over now. 3 days later, the band began their journey south. It was a procession both solemn and hopeful, an entire people choosing exile over extinction. Mary rode beside Taza, no longer a passenger but a full participant in their shared destiny. The journey was arduous. They crossed deserts where the heat shimmered like water, climbed mountains where the air grew thin, forded rivers swollen with spring snowmelt. But there was beauty too, sunsets that painted the sky in impossible colors, nights where the stars seemed close enough to touch, moments of joy around evening fires where stories were shared and bonds strengthened. They lost some along the way, the elderly who couldn't make the journey, including Nantan, who died peacefully one night after passing leadership to a younger chief. They mourned properly, but kept moving, always moving, toward a future uncertain but free. Finally, after weeks of travel, they reached the place, a valley in the Mexican mountains where water ran clear and game was plentiful, where no American soldiers would follow. It wasn't paradise, but it was possibility. As the band set about creating their new home, Mary and Taza stood together on a ridge overlooking the valley. The sun was setting, painting the mountains in shades of gold and crimson that reminded Mary of that first sunset in the hidden canyon, when an Apache warrior had chosen to save a lost white woman. No regrets? Taza asked, his arm around her. Mary considered everything she'd left behind: wealth, comfort, social position, the world she'd been born into. Then she looked at what she'd gained: love, purpose, freedom, a community that valued her for who she was rather than what she represented. None, she said firmly. This is home now. They were married in both traditions, Apache ceremony at dawn, Christian words at sunset, honoring both their worlds while creating something new. Elu stood as her sister. Dahlia blessed them with smoke and prayers, and the entire band celebrated the union that had begun in conflict but grown into hope. As night fell over their new home, Mary and Taza sat by their fire, planning the wickiup they would build, the life they would create. The challenges ahead were real: cultural differences to navigate, languages to master, children who would belong to both worlds and neither, but they would face them together. The old ones say, Taza told her, that some spirits are split at creation, scattered to far places. They spend their lives searching, incomplete, but sometimes, against all odds, they find each other again. Mary leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence. Is that what we are, split spirits reunited? Perhaps, he said, or perhaps we are something new, bridge between worlds, hope for future where Apache and white can find peace. That's a big dream, Mary said softly. Big dreams worth having. Taza replied, our children, their children, they will live in different world, maybe better world, because we chose love over fear. As if in blessing, a shooting star streaked across the desert sky. Mary made a wish, not for ease or comfort, but for strength to face whatever came. Beside her, Taza did the same. In the valley below, the Apache band settled into sleep, safe for now in their new home. And on the ridge, two people who should never have met, whose love should never have survived, held each other close and faced the future without fear. The desert wind whispered through the rocks, carrying the scent of sage and new beginnings. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf pack howled, not in loneliness but in celebration. Voices joined in harmony across the vast expanse. Love had found a way, against all odds. Despite all obstacles, love had found a way. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I hope Mary and Taza's journey touched your heart as much as it touched mine while sharing it. Where are you listening from today? Please comment below and let us know. I love connecting with listeners from around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel for more authentic frontier tales. And share your thoughts about Mary and Taza's story. Did you believe in their love? What would you have chosen in Mary's place? Let's discuss in the comments below.